Hi, everyone, and welcome to the Marketing Vanguard podcast. I'm Jenny Rooney with Adweek, and I'm thrilled today to be joined by Jason Bunge. He's the CMO of Hasbro. Jason, welcome.
Hi, Jenny. Great to be here. I appreciate the invite.
I appreciate your being here. We were saying that it feels like a meeting long overdue. So I love meeting new people on the Marketing Vanguard podcast. It's always sort of a joy for me to continue to meet.
Well, and likewise, I think you'll find, and I think I've said this certainly to many others. I think any platform that allows, I think, marketing to have, a voice, an appropriate voice in the conversation around brand building, consumer trends, and then obviously the role itself, I think is awesome. And Adweek has always been at the forefront of that. So I applaud what you all are doing, and I'm excited to just, play a small role in helping with that. So,
Well, thank you. And let's start there because I think for people, I'm curious where that sort of strong opinion comes from, because that's spoken like a CMO who has known the ins and outs and frankly the ups and downs of what it means to be a CMO in today's world, and frankly what it's meant to be a CMO frankly over the last 20 years. I mean, we've seen everybody likes to talk about the fact that we're living in a moment where change is accelerated, but I would argue that we've lived through massive periods of disruption, and it feels like there's never a time when the CMO role is not facing headwinds, challenge, opportunity, certainly. But tell us a little bit about your journey and what's brought you to this point.
yeah, I think, the headlines for me would be, I've been in marketing my whole career. Folks can go look me up on LinkedIn and look at that, and not to bore folks with it now. But really what it means is I've touched pretty much every aspect of the function in a variety of different companies, both agency as well as obviously client side, if you will. Lots of different industries across technology, consumer products, and now a little bit of mixture of both here at Hasbro. Um, and I think for me, like anyone who goes on that journey, right? I don't care if it's marketing, finance, or any other function in the professional world, in theory, you're supposed to get wiser. I think for me, that wisdom comes from both a little bit of confidence on what the role of marketing really needs to be at a company, but also a lot of pragmatism, and I think a lot of zen as it relates to ultimately what marketing has to still do, I think, to be relevant and to build, frankly, credibility within an organization. And so, happy to go down those different paths. But I think what you're going to hear from me, and I think what my team hears from me is both a lot of encouragement to be proactive as a marketer and points of view and what belief systems are and what impact of the business will be, but also balancing that with an understanding that, we're not finance, we're not the CFO. Those are very specific roles with very specific purposes that I think are much more understood. We're not product owners, where at many companies, that is the lifeblood of the success of a company is the product innovative? Is it resonating with consumers, et cetera? But yet we still have a really important role that I think oftentimes gets defined by others. And so I'll just maybe pause there and just kind of see where you want to go after that.
Yeah, I mean, look, I think this crisis of confidence, whether real or imagined, is nothing new. And so I feel like the crisis of confidence has been on both sides. It's been on the CMO side, but it's also been on the CEO side, obviously, CFO side. Um, and I do feel like there's so much nuance to that over the years, but I do feel like I'm going to kind of go against what I started by saying, which is basically that like change is a constant, nothing new about this day and age we're living in. Now I'm going to go back on that and say, especially with the advent of AI, and it feels like, and by that I mean not so much relative to the practice, but I think about the future of marketing, and my mind goes to students who are on college campuses right now or in business schools. I don't know, and I've spent a lot of time with business schools over the years. I'm really curious to know how many people are actually selecting marketing as a profession, given where we're at. I would like to think that that's still very much a growth path for people. But I don't know. It does feel a little bit different right now. So that's a big question, and I don't know how you want to sort of like chew into that. But what do we need to be thinking about, not just for like the moment now, with regard to the CMO role, but truly what it means for the future of marketing leadership?
No, it's a great question. And I think, and look, like, I think the obvious thing to say is I don't think marketing is a one size fits all approach, based on industry, company size, company product set, et cetera. However, there's this interesting question that I'll just build on yours, which is, you know, what is marketing? Like what is marketing today? And I think I would compartmentalize that question with what is the role of a CMO? And by the way, when I even say that, it's like, what is the role of a marketer inside of a company? There's a spectrum on both, right? On one side, you could have a very tactical answer to that question of like, well, marketers execute campaigns, they spend money, they drive demand, they build assets, things like that. On the other side of that is, well, actually, they're impacting strategy. They're, impacting product roadmap. They're influencing the future trajectory of the company and where growth comes from. And I think both those things can be true. Um, but to your point, I think a lot of times the conflation happens between, marketing as historically a outward facing set of ads. And I think we as a discipline a little bit do that to ourselves. I think we, again, legacy and muscle memory says, hey, awards and agencies and events in France, right? Those are all geared towards the output creatively. And again, it's not a bad thing. Like it's a little bit of the lifeblood of what consumer connection is, emotional connection is. But I think that masks, and I think it does a disservice to the fact that a lot of CMOs that I talk to, and I'll include myself in this as well. Yeah, that's important. Going in creating great engagement and content is important, but that's not the purpose of marketing. It's actually an artifact of, do you have great strategy for your brand? Are you able to build community? Are you influencing the rest of the C-suite? Like all those other things actually in my mind have to be true. And then the last thing I'll pause after this, you said it already, AI, which, it's almost a little cliche to say that now, but the reality is, if you're not as a CMO looking to operationalize AI, I'm not even talking about go use ChatGPT to help you write an email, like operationalize AI and how you go to market, you're already behind. And I think that's another part of the data side of marketing that's been emerging over the last, I'd say 5 to 10 years. All of that stuff comes well before the ad. And I think if we're constantly viewed as the ad team, the ad person, I think we lose. I think we're going to continue to struggle to dig out of the relevancy hole, to be honest.
Yeah, and I put the onus on the marketer community as much as anybody else. Like I think historically, and this is not a welcome opinion, but I feel like over the years there's been so much of a CMOs in the main or collectively talk about the external forces against them. You know what I mean? Or the fact that my CEO doesn't understand me, or my board doesn't understand the value of marketing. I just feel like that's a very reactive kind of stance. I just feel there's a much more active role that CMOs can play in rewriting their own narrative. So
It's the number one thing, like let's say it's one of the top 3 things I think marketing has to be great at, and it's just going to build on your point. And I think there's frankly a ton of CMOs out there who do this and they're doing it really well. But that is actually have a point of view, like have a point of view and then proactively set those expectations both internally and externally. And I think to your point, and this is in every company I've ever been at, and it's going to come off as a critique, and it's definitely not meant to be, because I think it's the realities of many marketers' situations at companies, which is you're constantly reactive, whether that's a CEO mandate, whether that's a external kind of situational change. And those are important things to be able to be agile as a marketer. So I'm not saying that that's not part of the job, but if all you're doing is being reactive, to your point, you're never going to create definition for your own purpose. And then it will be done for you. It's actually one of those unique, this will stream into the victim-y part, which I don't mean to be at all victim-y. But marketing is one of those interesting disciplines where one of its unique attributes is that everyone else in the company thinks they know marketing better than you do. And it's because they're consumers. And they're like, I know what good ads are. I know what good marketing is. And that's really the grounding of their understanding of what they think the discipline is for. So again, if you're not putting in front of them in a different point of view, a different way to think about it, a different lens to use, it's really difficult, I think, for a CMO and any marketer, to frankly find both impact opportunities, but also joy in the profession. So the other thing, wisdom taught me is you got to know how to smell that out, right? As you go from company to company, there are definitely questions you can ask and poke around to see if the place you're about to join truly appreciates and understand what marketing can and could be, or is it just, hey, no, we're going to give you a bunch of money and we need you to make sure you don't go crazy, but we need you to make good ads. Like that's, I think that's something that marketers have to look out for.
Okay, but you bring up, and by the way, we're gonna move after this I love this philosophical conversation stuff. Like I could spend all day here. We're gonna get to Hasbro in a second, but like I just want to say you just mentioned like a lot of everybody in the organization thinks they're a marketer because they're thinking they are the consumers, right? They're thinking like consumers. By the way, that's not a terrible thing. Like at the end of the day, if marketers are supposed to be at the behest of their consumers, oh, well, it's kinda interesting to see how the rest of your teammates might be viewing marketing, and maybe that's also I hadn't thought of it this way before, but maybe that's a really good reference point. That's a really good sort of, you know, focus group that marketers can actually tap into because that's where there shouldn't arguably, sake of argument, there shouldn't be a disconnect between how the consumers are viewing marketing coming from a brand and what
I totally agree. I love I love my colleagues as a qualitative set of feedback. It's fantastic. And I mean that truly. But at the same time, here's and you know this better than anybody, like, here's the next sentence that always comes up, which is, well, you're not always the target audience. And I think there is truth in that, particularly now, right? I mean, and we can move on to other stuff, but I would just say, uh, the generational differences, and nothing I'm saying is news to anybody, like the generational differences, and not even just their kind of macro behavior, but really their kind of micro engagement with brands and how they engage and the platforms they engage on. And I said this word community earlier, which is not a new concept. Community's been around for decades. But what is, again, back to that role of marketing, we can, I'll happily also chat with you for hours on this question. But I think like if we can't answer that question about what is the role and purpose of marketing, I think we get stuck. And I think we'd still let other stakeholders, as well intended as and amazingly smart as they are, to define it for us. And I don't think the CFO is looking for anyone else to define for them what the role of the CFO is. So why is a CMO let them do that to them? That's all.
such a great point. Such a great point. Yeah, I mean, it's all just things I think that the community needs to continue to watch out for and pay attention to. Now let's move to your current role. Obviously, Hasbro is, I mean, it's got some of the most iconic IP portfolios in entertainment. Um, what is it about how you came, I think, about 2 years ago? Is
Few years
that
ago. Yep.
And by the way, that's a typical well, no, actually it's 2 to 4 years, but I mean, you're sort of in that window. You've been there long enough now, you know all the details.
Sure. It's my fault from here on out. So yeah.
Your grace period's over. No, what gets you excited, about Hasbro? Kind of what's the inflection point at which it's at? And for people who don't know all the brands, Transformers, Dragons, I mean, there's just so much richness. Tell us a little bit about the portfolio.
Yeah. I think again, and for my role, like three things, if you will, like, I think that just give me nourishment and also were reasons why I joined. Um, One actually is just a little bit of a bridge from our last conversation. Like one is, um, I get a ton of support from Chris, our CEO, Gina Getter, our CFO, is a fantastic partner. The rest of the C-suite's an awesome set of partners. Our board, they're not, marketing's not their number one thing to care about, but they are incredibly supportive and engaged, on a topic. And so I feel that, and it comes in lots of different forms, but I feel that engagement, and it's very, very much a net positive, and it's something I deeply appreciate and value, and that's important. So that's one. The second one is, and you said this, look, I've been really fortunate and grateful to have worked on lots of different great brands in my career, and I think just at this stage, if I get to be picky, I still want to work on those things. Like I love the emotional connection that brands have with consumers. I am one of those consumers, one of those players of whether it's games or, like you said, toys of our youth. So as a marketer, like I just don't think there's a better remit you can be given than to really go mine the wealth of fandom and just joy that exists and nostalgia, right, for these brands. So That's my everyday. And then the third one is specific to the company structure, which is, when I started, and even today, like we had our earnings yesterday, and we're pleased with where we're at in terms of our journey. But the journey is actually multifaceted, right? So yes, historically, we are certainly a toy company. And you mentioned it. We have a fantastic IP that's beloved by millions around the world, and
Which,
that will
by
continue.
the way, with fabulous roots in Rhode Island, the
Yeah,
great state of Rhode Island. My mom's
yeah.
from Rhode Island,
No,
actually.
it's great. Yeah, New
It's got
England's
an
fun. Like
interesting, like,
yeah, no,
gorgeous.
it's a super fun place. Um, and we have a lot of work still to do there, right? If all you have to do is go back and look at what we said publicly yesterday, and our work's not done. The toy industry is a tough industry for all combatants, if you will, and not unlike other industries with different challenges. Like those are just things we have to navigate. And I think the leadership team over the last couple of years has tangibly made strides there. And again, like you can go back and listen to our earnings call, and you'll get all that kind of good tidbit. But that's one part of the business. But it's the way in which the world typically views us. The second part of the business, which we also talked about yesterday, is Wizards of the Coast and Magic the Gathering. Um, it's a whole different space, right? It's been around a long time, but the business is reaching levels that it hasn't had before, and there's a new momentum behind it that frankly begets not just great product strategy, which our leaders over in Seattle have, but frankly, it also begets a new role for marketing, which I can come back to. Because then in the third bucket, and you heard this also yesterday and previously, is that, we're launching video games next year. And so if you think about as a marketer, you're like, oh, like there's this digital growth future, or there's this trading card kind of pretty sort of niche, but oh my goodness, it's a niche that's now crossing into the billions of dollars. And then we have this wonderful toy legacy that we need to still right size and kind of get back to growth. Um, the role of marketing in each of those is quite different. And so from an intellectual standpoint, it's super, super fun. But then also from like just a business challenge standpoint, how do you scale? Like we're not Coca-Cola, we're not Apple. We don't have tons and tons and tons of resources. So marketing also has to be able to address those different business needs of those three areas, but do it in a way that's scalable and efficient. So anyway, I for me, like that's just super fun.
Yeah, so obviously, the tariffs are impacting you guys, especially as it relates to the physical products. So therefore, how much of diversification of your product suite is a result of that versus actually the journey you were already on with wanting to move more into streaming and video games and things like that?
Yeah, I think all I think the company strategy certainly predates any tariff action. And I think the company strategy, I think if anything, what we said talked about yesterday in the call was what we're finding is there's actually resilience in the strategy. If you think about diversification of any portfolio company, which I've worked in several, um, the ideal portfolio situation, right, is you're able to kind of lean in and leverage different aspects for different purposes. So there's growth areas, there's maintenance areas, there's kind of reinvestment areas. Um, and I think like any portfolio company, you could be different year to year. Typically not quite that, not frequent or variable, but I think as we get smarter about the roles of these different businesses, and again, video games haven't even launched yet, um, we have to and will get smarter around kind of what role we want those products to play. And I think again, tariffs, it's a current external headwind. It's something that we're managing, and it's not going to be the last external headwind that we have to deal with. And so I think what I get excited about, frankly, is our company strategy. I think is finding a lot of stability and resilience on our capability to navigate some of those external headwinds. And so I'm not shrugging off the material significance of tariffs. And, Gina talked about this yesterday in the call. But I actually am quite optimistic about our ability to navigate it in a way that is strategically sound and not reactive, if that makes sense.
Yeah, how are you thinking about how much time do you spend getting your head around your product suite versus your brand line? You know what I mean? How are you thinking about that?
Interesting distinction. Uh, this is a whole other couple hour conversation. Is there a difference between brand and product? Uh, I'm gonna. That's literally a 2 hour conversation. I'll start. I'll say this, and then you can tell me where you want to go. Um, One of the key questions I think we have to be able to answer, and I think this goes for any company, certainly consumer facing, and probably B2B as well. where does your brand derive its value from? And I think if you go back 10 years for Hasbro, maybe, well, you can go back further if you want to make the point. I think the answer for most of the toy brands would be, well, the brand derives its value from the plastic, the toy. Um, Fast forward, our licensing business is incredibly successful. And you mentioned entertainment earlier. That includes lots of different forms of entertainment. And so then you're like, like, well, actually, in the next 5 years, is that still true? Is the value that our brand gets its value, or where do we get our value from as a brand? Is it actually broader fandom elements? And it can still include toys by absolutely every measure. But I think what you're seeing is, I think, and Disney, I think, is a great example of this, where they've been able to expand the value, or like, of where the brands get their value from across theme parks, movies, right, TV, etc. And I think what you're going to see from us is more intention around where we think a GI Joe should get its value from, where a Play-Doh should get its value from, where a Magic the Gathering should get its value from. And I think that is still obviously work ahead of us. And again, this is not unique to us, but I would just couch it that way, which is, it's not even brand versus product. I think Chris, our CEO, would tell you, if we're not innovating on the product side, like, that's going to be, death for the company. Like, we are a product company. Like, if we're not innovating constantly in those areas for our fans and players and consumers, we're not going to have a lot of success. Meaning, we can't just ride the coattails of a brand, right? We are not a company that's just going to market our way, so to speak, into like great brand resonance, and then whatever product we put out there is going to do fine. That's not the order of things. It's going to be the other way around. It doesn't diminish the importance of brand. It doesn't diminish the importance of that connection with consumers, but it really has to start with product, if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I thank you for that answer. I do think it's a really interesting question, though, the way how you're thinking about it, how you're approaching it. Talk to me a little bit about what you guys are seeing in terms of consumer habits vis-a-vis play, and generationally. I mean, literally the concept of play, how is that being redefined? How is that being defined? How are you working to define it? Even as you think about the forces against you that are redefining play that's out of your hands, right? And I mean, in a world where kids and, are looking at screens starting at, sadly, age 2, or, if not sooner, like, I mean, that, again, big philosophical question, but that's at the core of what you do. So, like, the future of play as a choice is also critical for you as a company.
I love the question. We very much think in similar ways. And you said generational. And I'm trying, like, I can give you, like, I think, some headlines on this in terms of how we might be approaching this. And again, this is not unique to us. I think, the broader industry across lots of categories are seeing this. Um, I think what we believe to be true is that you're seeing almost an inverse of kind of what you might expect. So you mentioned already, hey, kids earlier and earlier are getting on screens. They're certainly digital natives. Platforms like Roblox, are their social vehicles, Fortnite, etc. That's how they interact with friends. It's just very commonplace to them. It's not even like, oh, why would you do that? It's like, well, of course I do that. That's where everyone is. So does that mean there is no room for physical play? No, but it means we have to be smarter about the products, right? And the experiences we want to put in front of those kids at those certain ages. And then the inverse part comes in, is actually, as they get older, what we're seeing is, and, Lego would say this too, and Mattel as well, like, it's the adults that are going back to the physical side. There's a
Very,
great,
I
I mean,
love
there's great,
that. Yeah.
yeah, there's great data around, even, not that they're old by any stretch, but, like, the millennials, as they age, they actually, and even Gen Z a little bit, like, there's all this data around, they're seeking out tactile experiences outside of screen. And so what's key there for us is being relevant across, right, their lifetime. So what is the right engagement point when they're 4 years old versus 45? Is it going to be the same? No, of course not. However, that doesn't mean you can't be a Transformers fan or a Magic fan for the entirety of your life. And that's typically what we see happen for a lot of our businesses. And so our job, of course, is is to maintain relevancy from an offering standpoint. And then B, and I'll use the word community again. Marketing's job, and again, this is not new at all, but marketing's job as it relates to community is you got to create space for those folks and your fans to interact with each other physically, digitally. Maybe it's a third party platform like Roblox. Maybe it's your own manufactured platform, et cetera. It could be events, all these things. We are seeing, and Chris mentioned this on the call yesterday, MagicCon is a conference we hold a few times a year for Magic. It's been around a while, but all we're doing is seeing higher and higher and higher attendance every single time we do it. And if you talk to people there, it's obviously because they love the brand, but it's more that they love playing with fellow Magic fans of all ages. And so, again, that's for me a great example of you're creating a venue for your community to interact with each other, and you kind of get out of the way and you let them basically do what they love most with your brand, which is play and socialize and all these things. So, yeah, I think we very much think in terms of generational kind of stickiness. Our product teams are really tasked with making sure they have clear sense of what offering makes sense when, and not all brands obviously will span generations, so that's okay. And so we just need to be intentional about that. But yeah, I think you hear from me what you hear from others, which is there's an aging up, right, from a physical place perspective. The word collectability is
Mhm.
becoming a bigger and bigger thing.
Nostalgia. I mean, obviously,
Nostalgia, totally,
the
totally.
I'm Gen X, and I love all the nostalgia stuff that's circulating around. To see
Well,
all.
yeah, and as you know, right, I mean, as a 40-year-old versus a 4-year-old, your disposable income is different.
Of course,
And
absolutely.
and
That's
so,
biggest.
and your choices are obviously more specific. And I think the brands of any category that do the best job of helping that 45-year-old remember what it was like to be the 4-year-old and give them reasons to stay engaged and pass it down or whatever form that takes, those are the brands that are going to win. Like that's where the stickiness comes from. So
How do you think about, building franchises? Like, is that a word that you're using an awful lot these days?
yeah, it is. I sort of pause on that. I think franchise as a word, like, it's one of those words that lots of folks can very legitimately define differently. And I think it sends people to different places. Um, I'll actually say for me, it goes back to the thing I mentioned earlier, which is you've got to first be able to very clearly define where your brand gets its value from. There has to be a core, right? A center of gravity. And then your concentric circles around that basically is the ecosystem you build. And Disney again, they're, I think, probably the best in class at this, where it's like, hey, I have Mickey Mouse, right? Started as an animated cartoon. I build it around that a theme park experience. I build around that a consumer product line, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And they've extrapolated that, of course, to lots of other of their IP very, very successfully. But I bet if you ask them, what is the core value that where Mickey Mouse gets its value from, they'll have a very specific answer that I won't pretend to know what that answer is. But um, that is, I think, an important part of being able to even think about a franchise. Because I think sometimes when people say franchise, they go to tactics. Oh, we want a movie. Oh, we want a TV show. And it's like, why? Like, you gotta be able to know why that's going to be accretive to the core brand value that you currently have today.
Are there brands that have done that successfully that you've shepherded through that you feel like warranted that kind of approach?
Uh, I mean, I've been a part of several that I think have tried and dabbled, right? I mean, if I go back to Riot Games when I was there, um, we launched Arcane, which was an animated Netflix series based on League of Legends. Um, an amazing show, won Emmys, right? It was hugely successful with the population and certainly League fans and frankly non-League fans. Um, but the
I mean,
question always,
Lego obviously is an example. Lego
yeah,
Movie,
and but the question is like,
Barbie. Yeah,
what does it do for the core? Because if you asked Riot and you ask them, hey, where does League of Legends get its value from? It's the game, right? It's a MOBA. It's really complicated as a game, but it has 150 million people that play it every month. So the question is like, hey, did Arcane actually, was it accretive to that core value proposition? Um, and so I think a lot of companies struggle with that, right? We'll go back to Chelsea's Transformers and Hasbro. Like the very first Transformers movie was a boon, to the toy business. And I think sequentially, and this is not a commentary subjectively on the quality of the movies. It's more about, is that still where the accretive value comes from for Transformers? Or maybe it's a community of hardcore Optimus Prime fans who just want the latest and greatest, really cool collectible on our Pulse platform. I think you have to be able to start to answer those questions, because it also obviously drives investment. Do you really need to make a movie anymore, or should it be some other expenditure of capital? So again, that's not saying one way is right or one way is wrong. I just think when you say franchise, I kind of go back to that core question. And before you start adding cool things around it, I think a lot of that stuff, as I've seen it, like tends to not work, because you haven't answered that core question.
How are you thinking about building the Hasbro brand and making Hasbro front and center, or at least having people understand or appreciate Hasbro versus the individual brands?
Yeah, it's a really good question. I think portfolio companies, and they're all a little different. Like EA, we had the same topic, which is, does the Electronic Arts brand matter? And if you think about video games, right, the number one brand that matters the most by a long shot is the game. A distant second is the studio. And then like deep in the Earth's core, if you go into altitude, is EA. And that might be a perfectly acceptable strategy, because at the end of the day, you're selling video games, and you really want fandom around the game. You don't really need fandom around EA. However, at the same company, you had EA Sports, and EA Sports actually as a brand connotes quality. It connotes simulation expertise. It connotes, hey, you're gonna have a good time, whether it's Madden, football, FIFA soccer, etc. So you're like, oh, well, EA Sports matters. Okay. So then you go to Hasbro, and it's kind of a similar situation. Like Wizards of the Coast, same thing. D&D matters a lot. Magic matters a lot. Transformers matters a lot. Do consumers care as much, or players, about Wizards of the Coast, Hasbro? Oftentimes those corporate brands get used as like the shield, for the sub brands to not take on the, look what Hasbro or Wizards is doing to XYZ of my favorite thing. EA was the exact same way. I don't think there's a right and wrong in there. I think though, if you're gonna invest in, say, your corporate brand, certainly it matters for employees. It certainly matters for future employees. It matters for partners. So I think we don't dismiss the value of that. But I think from a consumer facing standpoint, if you asked me, hey, if you have $1 to spend, are you going to spend it on Transformers or Hasbro? I'm going to spend it on Transformers every single time. And that doesn't mean, again, Hasbro is unimportant. I think we're a company that's not unique in the journey of, well, what do we want Hasbro to mean? It's got great legacy. If you sell someone it's Hasbro, they'll be like, oh, Hasbro's great. But what was also true, if you said, hey, did you know your favorite gamer, toy is from Hasbro? Like, oh, I know, I had no idea. So you have to be able to decide whether that matters. And then if it does matter, right, you have to be choiceful about what does investment mean there. So we're definitely thinking about it. Like, it's not something we're ignoring. I think that we want to be, again, intentional about what its purpose is, vis-a-vis, as you said, like just some amazing iconic brands that exist in the portfolio.
Question about retail, and distribution. Anything shifting there that's just different, new, interesting? How you're thinking about that strategy?
I think, I mean, you can look at like Circana's data on this, and, in terms of broad consumer behavior, and this is, of course, very, very bespoke based on region around the world. But, digital and e-commerce continues to grow fastest, no surprise. And that's not just Amazon. And Central and South America, you have Mercado Libre, right? And they're growing very, very fast within the toy category, and obviously others, but certainly within the toy category. Does that mean that people aren't still going to Walmart in physical? No, of course not. And so
We lost toy stores in a long time ago. I mean, that is a destination obviously dried up.
yeah, and I think it's interesting in some ways. While that I'm sure was painful for the category, I think if you want to be glass half full on that, I think the removal of that has forced toy companies, for example, to be, again, more intentional about strategy on like, well, what does it mean to be successful at shelf in Walmart or Target, or partner with Amazon in the US, right? So I would say, we're seeing, trends that I think are largely consistent with other categories, both from, like you said earlier, aging up, aging down, but also where people are discovering. That's the other thing, like where people are discovering content and product. Um, Retail media is a bigger and bigger thing.
Yeah, I was gonna ask you, retail media just does that hold a value for you?
It does. I mean, it varies by platform, uh, which you could probably assume, but and that's the value vary by platform. Honestly, is just about the maturity of the platform, right? And Amazon is just well ahead of most. It doesn't mean others aren't good. Um, but what people have caught on to, of course, is like, hey, that's a lucrative revenue stream for my world. And when you are the size of Walmart, Amazon, et cetera, you can afford to do that. And I think it'll be interesting to see how does that, displace more and more kind of generic search, if you will, on something like Google versus like, no, I just go to Amazon and I search on Amazon and I find what I need. And like, that's how I get it. We definitely are seeing more and more of that type of behavior.
Yep. Um, Last few quick questions because I know we're running low on time. But back to you and your personal career journey. Obviously, I think obviously the red thread through it is tech. I mean, you have, you know, I mean, it's Skype, it's Trulia, it's Microsoft, it's Riot Games, as you said. I mean, that has been your consistent narrative as a marketer. Was that intentional? Was that by default? Is that, you went to Harvard Business School was that for your MBA or was that for
Yeah.
undergrad?
MBA.
So talk a little bit about, just for anybody who's just kind of looking at you as a model of CMO, what do you want to flag in that? And how much of that was intentional? How much is that you just feeling like tech marketing was where the most innovation and creativity could happen? Or is that something that you fell into that you really harnessed to build your own expertise?
Yeah, no, it's a great question. Uh, I would be lying if I said it was certainly there was definitely intention throughout my career, and there was definitely serendipity. Um, there was definitely a little bit of good fortune, and there's definitely also, and I said this to a lot of folks, and look, this is my personal opinion, but I just said yes to stuff. Like I said yes to stuff that I don't know, maybe it wasn't really what I wanted to do, but it was an opportunity. It was something that it was to take on more. It was to learn new things, and you just say yes. And so I'm just a big believer philosophically, as and frankly, probably any function, but certainly for marketing. If someone asks you, your boss, whoever, like, hey, I've got a thing that I need you to think about, you say yes. And then those things almost always beget more opportunities. So I would say that in general is kind of how I thought about my journey. I think Microsoft, I loved my time at Microsoft. I'd say the thing it taught me more than anything was I don't want to be in B2B marketing. I did that for most of my time there. And I just didn't like it. Like it just wasn't, it didn't speak to me as a marketer, or even as a professional. And so like, that's the only way you're really going to learn is if you try it. So that was very informative. Um, I like staying in tech. I think I find tech to be as a mindset. It's just very progressive. It's very like get stuff done. Um, at least when I was doing it, right? I'm sure the bigger companies like always come with bureaucracy, but there was just a speed element. It wasn't worried about getting it wrong. It was like, just go do cool stuff, learn, iterate, and then repeat. And by the way, like, don't be stupid. And if you're going to make too many mistakes, then yeah, you probably don't have a role. But there was a ruthlessness to it that I kind of liked because it just took a lot of the noise out of the system and I just focused on results. So I grew up in that environment. Um, and then EA for me was really the first time in my career I got to work at a company where I love the products personally. Like I played video games since I was a kid, Atari, whatever. And so that was just amazing. And then of course you learn like, oh, it's just more fun to play the video games than actually have to market them because it's still a business. But I think again, that just told me, hey, if I get to choose, this is a general space that I want to play in. We all get one trip on the planet, right? So you might as well spend time in an area that you're going to be at least a little bit excited about. Um, and so that's kind of what brought me even to Hasbro. Like I was looking at their stuff, but I don't think I can say no to a place that has all that it has. So yeah, as far as advice, I would say yes, and then yeah, know what you like. Like I think create constraints for yourself. B2B, no, great. That's a really important constraint because I have to waste time, talking to again amazing companies, but just they weren't going to want me, and I wasn't going to want those opportunities. So
Yeah, but is Hasbro, I mean, the irony here is Hasbro a tech company? Is it a toy company?
Ah,
Consumer goods company?
ah. Well, uh, the journey continues, Jenny. I'll just you'll we'll talk let's touch base in like a year from now, or not that we have to wait a year, but like let's see how we're doing on that. Let's see how we're doing.
Okay, well, that's a perfect segue into my, almost last question, which is what's next? What's next on the horizon? What news can we expect to see from you? Can you tease some things? Um, listen, we got 6 months of 2025 ahead of us, and so by all means, I know you're planning deeply, probably planning into 26 and beyond. So talk a little bit about what we can expect to see. What are some highlights that get you excited in the
Yeah, I think I'll think about the tease thing for our next chat. Like, I probably don't have a good answer to that now. And then probably then, Andrea, and other of my colleagues will be like, what are you talking about? Quiet. So I won't wade into those waters. But what I would say is, and again, like some of this is a little bit emphasizing points that we've already discussed. I think the two biggest areas, and that are, I think we're most excited about, are going to be our video game plays. Exodus has been announced already. Chris mentioned this on the call yesterday. We're aiming for end of next year as a launch. That's a big moment for us, and I've worked, Electronic Arts, right? Like these are companies that have been doing this their whole existence. This is the first time we're going to do it. So we got an amazing, stable of expertise here. And we have every chance of success, but success is never guaranteed. So I think like that's something we're very excited about and very bullish on. And then the other one, honestly, is Magic. It's interesting, right? Like it's over $1 billion, and yet most people don't know about it, and it's really complex, and it's a pretty niche game as its journey has been, historically for almost 30 years. Um, but it's starting to like, Pokemon is kind of the big standard kind of collectible card game out there globally. And if you say Pokemon to people, most people are like, oh, I know Pokemon. Um, Magic has every opportunity to get there, is what I'll say. And our ambition is absolutely that. And so I think what you can expect from us the rest of this year, and certainly all through next year, is announcements and product news and, new investment areas for how we think we're going to go at that opportunity space. But Magic players, they're hungry for it. They're an amazing community themselves. And honestly, I think we owe them that, right? Which is to have that kind of ambition. So I'd say like, yeah, more news from us coming, on the video game stuff. And Chris said this yesterday as well. And I think we could not be more excited about that. We could not be more excited about Magic. And then the other thing, again, like not to, put toy third in terms of relative, that's not important. It's just to say, I think we're going to surprise some people with a lot of the new product innovation that's coming out the rest of this year and in the next year. And I think, the bar for us as success though is yes, are we building things that are being snapped up by consumers and played with by, children and adults of all ages. But we also have to, right size that business. And so that's something that, I think we're also pretty bullish about. So anyway, I'll give you those answers, and then, I'll think about more of a fun answer, if you will, for our next time. So
No problem. I think I could be wrong. I think you're coming to Brand Week, our Brand Week in Atlanta in November.
yes, looking
Um,
forward to it.
so
Yes.
that will be exciting because, there could be some things you share on stage, so just planting that seed there. Um, Last quick question is who's next, Jason? Who's somebody that I should have on the Marketing Vanguard podcast? Somebody who you admire? They can be somebody, a CMO that you know really well, or it can be somebody who you haven't met yet, but you admire from afar based on the incredible work they're doing.
It's a great question. God, I can give you like a long list of names for that one. I, um, I'll shout out a couple folks that I've actually worked with. Uh, there's a woman named Andrea Hopelane who I hired into EA, and she's still there. You're smiling, so you must know her.
I
Um,
don't know her well, but I
she's
know of.
fantastic.
Love to
She's
reach out to
she's
her.
absolutely fantastic and incredibly
Yeah.
smart and just kicking butt there. She's running the EA Sports, business at EA, and just at the forefront of culture and stuff like that. So I would highly recommend, if you don't know her, like, to reach out. Um, and then I'd say another woman that actually I hired into Riot, who has done an amazing set of things, is Francine Lee, who is just CMO at Ipsy. And there's many, many more, but I call those two leaders out just because, well, one, I know them really well, but two, they're just, I think they represent the future. Like, if we end where we started this conversation, I think those two individuals really represent, I think, what marketing needs to be and become. And they're super agile. They're super smart. They're going to lead in a progressive way as it relates to the function, and they're not afraid to define it. Right? They're not wallflowers. They're going to let someone define it for them. They're folks that are going to get out there in front. And I think super highly of them both. I think you'd enjoy meeting them.
Well, I mean, perfect ending. We circled back to where we started. I did lie. We did go over 30 minutes. So thank you for having a little bit of flexibility.
I loved it. I really appreciate it. It was super fun.
Well, thank you so much, Jason. I look forward to seeing you again very, very soon, following the story. Until the next. Thanks for being on the Marketing Vanguard podcast.
Thanks, Jenny.
Thank you for listening to Marketing Vanguard, part of the Adweek Podcast Network and Acast Creator Network. You can listen and subscribe to all of Adweek's podcasts by visiting adweek.com/podcasts. Stay updated on all things Adweek Podcast Network by following us on Twitter at Adweek Podcasts. And if you have a question or suggestion for the show, send us an email at podcast@adweek.com. Thanks for listening.